The Seeds of Devotion. Eleanor Winters first met Vincent Hargrove on a rainy Tuesday in April, beneath the striped awning of a small bookshop in town. She had been reaching for a weathered copy of Pride and Prejudice when his hand accidentally brushed against hers. Their eyes met, and something inexplicable passed between them, a spark that would eventually grow into an enduring flame. Vincent wasn't wealthy then. He owned a modest carpentry workshop that barely paid the bills, crafting furniture with such passion that Eleanor often found him working until dawn, his hands calloused but gentle. She was a kindergarten teacher, bringing home a modest salary that helped them survive month to month in their tiny apartment above Mrs. Donovan's flower shop. One day, Vincent would whisper as they lay in bed, the moonlight casting silver patterns on their wall, "I'll build you a home where you can plant every flower you've ever dreamed of growing." Eleanor would smile, running her fingers through his chestnut hair. "I don't need a garden, Vincent. I just need you." Their first years together were painted with beautiful hardships. When Vincent's workshop caught fire 3 years into their marriage, destroying nearly everything he had built, Eleanor didn't hesitate. She sold the pearl necklace her grandmother had given her, her only valuable possession, to help him restart. "This is just a setback," she told him firmly, pressing the money into his trembling hands. "Your talent is worth more than any jewelry." With that money, Vincent rented a new space and took a risk on a different venture, custom cabinetry for luxury homes. His craftsmanship quickly gained attention, and within a year he had hired 2 assistants. By their 5th anniversary, Vincent Hargrove Designs had become the premier woodworking company in the region. As their fortunes grew, so did the circle of people around them. Vincent's cousins Beatrice and Thomas suddenly remembered their family connection. His half-brother Gregory began calling regularly, and his uncle Philip, who had once refused to lend Vincent a mere $100, now suggested family investment opportunities. Eleanor watched this parade of newfound relatives with quiet concern. "They never called when you were struggling," she observed one evening as Vincent hung up from yet another conversation with Gregory. Vincent sighed, the weight of success already showing in the fine lines around his eyes. "Family is complicated, Ellie. Gregory says he's proud of what I've built." "What we've built," Eleanor corrected gently. "I believe in forgiveness, but I also believe in remembering who stood beside you in the rain." Despite her reservations, Eleanor welcomed Vincent's family into their home, the beautiful Tudor house on Maple Street that he had renovated himself, complete with the garden she had always dreamed of. She cooked elaborate Sunday dinners, listened to their stories, and never mentioned the years of silence. But she noticed the way Beatrice's eyes narrowed when Vincent presented Eleanor with a diamond bracelet on their 10th anniversary. She caught Thomas's dismissive glance when she mentioned her continued teaching, despite no financial need. And she heard Gregory's whispered comment at their 15th anniversary party, "She's lucky he keeps her around. He could have anyone now." Through it all, Eleanor remained Vincent's steady compass. When he considered risky expansions, she counseled patience. When stress overwhelmed him, she created peaceful spaces. When success threatened to change him, she gently reminded him of the man she had fallen in love with, the one who found joy in creating beauty with his hands. "You are the foundation beneath everything I've built," Vincent told her on their 20th anniversary, as they stood in their garden watching fireflies dance among the roses. "Without you, I would have crumbled long ago." Eleanor didn't realize then how prophetic those words would become, or how soon the foundation of their life together would be tested in ways she had never imagined. Thorns among roses. The transformation of Vincent Hargrove from skilled craftsman to business magnate happened so gradually that Eleanor sometimes found herself startled by their new reality. By their 22nd anniversary, Vincent Hargrove Designs had expanded into luxury furniture stores across 3 states, with talks of international partnerships on the horizon. Their modest Tudor home had been replaced by a sprawling estate overlooking the valley, a masterpiece of architecture that Vincent had designed himself. With Eleanor's garden now a half-acre sanctuary of rare flowers and meandering stone paths. With prosperity came a subtle shift in their world. The dinner parties grew larger, the conversations more centered on investments and acquisitions. Vincent began traveling more frequently, returning home with shadows beneath his eyes and a distracted smile that didn't quite reach them. "Are you happy with all this?" Eleanor asked one evening as they sat on their terrace, the sunset painting their manicured grounds in gold and amber. Vincent looked surprised by the question. Of course I am. We've achieved everything we dreamed of, haven't we? Eleanor considered the crystal glass in her hand, the imported wine, the distant view of the city where they had once struggled to pay rent. I suppose we have. I just miss you. The you who used to spend Sundays sketching new designs rather than reviewing contracts. Vincent's expression softened. He reached across the table and took her hand, his thumb brushing over her wedding ring. Still the simple gold band he had given her when they could afford little else. I'm still that man, Ellie. Everything I do is for us, for our future. But us had become a more complicated concept. Vincent's family had inserted themselves firmly into their lives, with Gregory now serving as Vincent's chief financial officer. Beatrice had somehow appointed herself as the coordinator of their social calendar, while Thomas managed their real estate investments. Family dinners had transformed into business meetings where Eleanor often felt invisible. You should update your wardrobe for the Tokyo meeting, Beatrice commented one Sunday, eyeing Eleanor's modest dress with thinly veiled disapproval. Vincent will be meeting with fashion icons. You need to look the part. My wife looks beautiful in anything, Vincent replied firmly, but later that evening, Eleanor found a designer's business card slipped into her purse. The whispers grew more audible as the years passed. At the company's 25th anniversary gala, Eleanor overheard Gregory in heated conversation with Vincent. She was suitable when you were making cabinets, Vincent, but you're moving in different circles now. Have you considered what investors think when they meet her? She still talks about her kindergarten students as if teaching finger painting is comparable to running a multi-million-dollar enterprise. Eleanor froze, the champagne flute cold against her fingers. She waited for Vincent's defense, but his response was muffled, lost in the swelling orchestra music. When he returned to her side minutes later, his smile seemed strained, his eyes avoiding hers. That night, Eleanor stood before their bedroom mirror studying herself. At 52, she had aged gracefully, her brown hair now streaked with elegant silver, laugh lines framing eyes that had witnessed both struggle and triumph. She was not the sophisticated socialite Beatrice wished her to be, nor the strategic business partner Gregory thought Vincent deserved. She was simply Eleanor, the woman who had believed in a carpenter's dreams. Is something wrong? Vincent asked, coming up behind her and resting his hands on her shoulders. Eleanor met his gaze in the reflection. Do you ever wish you had married someone more suited to this life we have now? Vincent's arms encircled her waist, his chin resting on her shoulder. There is no one more suited to be my wife than you, Eleanor Hargrove. Don't let them make you question that. But the seed of doubt had been planted, and it grew alongside the increasing pressure on Vincent. At 57, his health began to falter. First small complaints of fatigue, then troubling test results, and finally, the diagnosis that sent their carefully constructed world tilting on its axis. Aggressive pancreatic cancer. Eleanor moved immediately into action, researching specialists and treatments, transforming their home office into a command center for Vincent's care. His family responded differently. Gregory began spending more time at headquarters, making decisions without consultation. Beatrice spoke of contingency plans in hushed tones when she thought Eleanor couldn't hear. Thomas started bringing documents for Vincent to sign during his more lucid moments. You need to rest, Eleanor insisted one afternoon, intercepting Thomas at the bedroom door with yet another folder. Whatever business matters need attention can wait until Vincent is stronger. Thomas's smile didn't reach his eyes. Some things can't wait, Eleanor. Vincent understands the company needs direction. That's why he's appointed Gregory as interim CEO. The announcement struck Eleanor like a physical blow. He made that decision without discussing it with me? Business matters have never been your area of expertise, Thomas replied smoothly. Vincent is simply ensuring everything continues running smoothly, for everyone's benefit. That evening, while Vincent dozed beside her, Eleanor discovered a new document on his nightstand, a draft of revised estate plans that Gregory had prepared. As she scanned the pages, her heart pounded painfully against her ribs. The provisions would effectively give Gregory and the board control over most of Vincent's assets to ensure business continuity, with Eleanor receiving a generous living allowance. After 28 years of partnership, she was being reduced to a dependent, a footnote in the empire they had built together. When Vincent woke, she showed him the document with trembling hands. "Is this what you want?" she asked quietly. Vincent's face, gaunt from treatments, flushed with anger. "I never authorized this. Gregory said he was drafting standard protection measures, but this—" He pushed himself upright with effort. "Get me the phone, Eleanor. Some thorns need cutting before they strangle the entire garden." Withered dreams. The winter that followed Vincent's diagnosis was the coldest Eleanor could remember. Outside, snow blanketed their estate in pristine white, while inside, the warmth that had defined their home for nearly 3 decades seemed to be slowly draining away, much like Vincent's strength. After discovering Gregory's unauthorized estate plan, Vincent had summoned his attorney, Julian Mercer, for an emergency meeting. Eleanor had sat beside Vincent's bed, holding his increasingly frail hand as he'd spoken with uncharacteristic harshness. "I want Gregory removed from his position immediately," Vincent had instructed, his voice weak but determined. "And I need to review every document I've signed in the past 3 months." Julian, a silver-haired man who had handled the Hargroves' legal matters for 15 years, looked troubled. Vincent, removing Gregory so abruptly, could destabilize the company. "The board might. The board serves at my pleasure," Vincent interrupted. "This company bears my name, and I will not have my wife's future compromised by anyone, family or otherwise." The confrontation that followed had been ugly. Gregory, flanked by Beatrice and Thomas, had stormed into Vincent's bedroom despite Eleanor's protests. "This is madness," Gregory had shouted, waving the termination notice. "You're not thinking clearly. The treatments are affecting your judgment." Vincent, propped against his pillows, had appeared almost translucent in the afternoon light, but his eyes blazed with the same fire Eleanor had fallen in love with all those years ago. "My judgment has never been clearer," he'd replied. "Eleanor stays as the primary beneficiary and will have controlling interest in the company. That was always my intention. She'll run it into the ground within a year," Beatrice had exclaimed, her perfectly manicured hands gesturing wildly. "She knows nothing about this business. She knows everything about honor and loyalty," Vincent had countered. 2 qualities this family seems to have forgotten. They'd left in a chorus of slammed doors and threats of legal action. That night, Vincent had suffered the first of several seizures that would mark his rapid decline. As February melted into March, Eleanor's world narrowed to the rhythm of medications, the hushed consultations with doctors and the quiet hours beside Vincent's bed. She read to him from the books they had loved together, described the first crocuses emerging in her garden, and whispered memories of their early days when happiness had nothing to do with wealth. The legal battles continued in the background. Gregory had rallied a faction of board members who questioned Vincent's competence to make business decisions. Court filings arrived with alarming regularity, each more aggressive than the last. "They're trying to wear him down," Julian warned Eleanor one evening after Vincent had fallen into an exhausted sleep. "They're hoping he'll be too weak to fight." "Then I'll fight for him," Eleanor had responded, surprising herself with the steel in her voice. She began spending her precious free hours in Julian's office, learning about shareholder agreements and voting rights. She studied the company's structure until her eyes burned, determined to understand the empire Vincent had built. When she visited headquarters, something she had rarely done before, executives who had previously dismissed her with polite smiles now found themselves facing pointed questions about quarterly projections and market strategies. "Mrs. Hargrove seems to have developed quite an interest in operations," she overheard one director comment to another. "Desperation," was the dismissive reply. "She knows her time is running out." Perhaps it was this comment that spurred Eleanor to make her boldest move. On a rare afternoon when Vincent was lucid and relatively pain-free, she brought him a proposal she had developed with Julian's guidance. "A charitable foundation?" Vincent asked, studying the documents. Eleanor nodded, sitting on the edge of their bed. "The Vincent and Eleanor Hargrove Foundation. It would control 30% of the company shares, dedicated to supporting craftsmanship, education, and community development. The values you started with." Vincent's eyes, sunken in his pale face, filled with tears. "You've thought of everything." "I learned from the best," Eleanor replied, carefully brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. This way, regardless of what happens, your true legacy will be protected. Vincent signed the foundation documents that afternoon. When Gregory discovered the transfer 2 days later, his fury manifested in a flurry of legal threats that Julian calmly deflected. The foundation is ironclad, Julian assured Eleanor. They can't touch those shares. But the victory was bittersweet. By early April, Vincent's condition had deteriorated beyond the point of recovery. The specialist spoke in hushed tones of comfort measures and quality remaining time. Eleanor moved a small bed into their room to remain constantly at his side, monitoring his breathing through the night, holding cool cloths to his forehead during fever spikes. On a surprisingly warm spring morning, Vincent woke with unexpected clarity. He asked to be moved to the chaise lounge near the window that overlooked Eleanor's garden, where the daffodils he had planted for her last autumn were now in full bloom. "Remember when I promised you a garden?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Eleanor knelt beside him, pressing her cheek against his hand. "You've given me so much more than that, Vincent." His fingers weakly stroked her hair. "There's one more thing coming. Julian has the details." His breathing grew labored. "You won't just survive this, Eleanor. You'll flourish. Like your garden after winter?" "Don't talk that way," Eleanor pleaded, feeling his grip slacken. "We still have time." But Vincent's gaze had already drifted to the window, to the garden beyond. "Beautiful," he murmured. "So beautiful." That evening, as the setting sun cast long shadows across the blooming daffodils, Vincent Hargrove took his final breath, his hand still clasped in Eleanor's. The days that followed passed in a blur of arrangements and formalities. Eleanor moved through them like a sleepwalker, supported physically by her sister Josephine, who had arrived from Portland, and emotionally by the memories of Vincent that seemed to inhabit every corner of their home. Gregory and the others maintained a respectful distance at the funeral, offering condolences that rang hollow to Eleanor's ears. But she noticed the calculating glances, the whispered consultations, the barely concealed impatience as the minister spoke of Vincent's generous spirit and visionary mind. They were already looking beyond the grief, to the reading of the will that would determine the fate of Vincent Hargrove's considerable estate. Eleanor caught Gregory checking his watch during the burial service and felt a cold realization settle in her heart. For them, Vincent's death was simply a business transaction waiting to be completed. 1 week after laying Vincent to rest beneath the oak tree on their property, a spot he had chosen years ago, Eleanor received the formal notice from Julian's office. The will would be read the following Monday at 10 o'clock. That night she stood alone in Vincent's study, surrounded by the artifacts of his success, awards, photographs with dignitaries, the original hand tools he had used to build their first kitchen table. On his desk sat a sealed envelope with her name written in his increasingly shaky hand, dated just 3 days before his death. "For Eleanor," it read. To be opened before the will reading, with trembling fingers, she broke the seal. The reading of roots. The morning of the will reading dawned with an unseasonable chill that matched the coldness Eleanor felt spreading through her chest. She had barely slept. Vincent's letter lying open on her nightstand where she had read it countless times since breaking the seal. "My dearest Eleanor," he had written, his once bold handwriting now fragile and uneven. "By the time you read this, I will have left you to tend our garden alone, though I promise my love remains rooted beside you. What happens tomorrow may seem cruel at first, but trust that I have planted seeds you cannot yet see. Remember the winter of our 3rd year together, when frost killed every seedling in your first greenhouse? You told me then that sometimes destruction precedes the most beautiful growth. Hold fast to that wisdom. All my love for all time, Vincent." The letter's cryptic message had left Eleanor restless and uneasy. Now as she dressed in a simple black dress, ignoring Beatrice's texted suggestion to wear something more appropriate for such an important occasion, Vincent's words echoed in her mind. What had he meant by "may seem cruel"? Julian had arranged for the reading to take place in the conference room of his downtown office, rather than at the Hargrove estate. "Neutral territory," he had explained when Eleanor questioned the choice. As her car approached the imposing glass building, she noticed several expensive vehicles already parked in the reserved spaces. Gregory, Beatrice, and Thomas had arrived early, no doubt strategizing until the last moment. In the elevator, Eleanor closed her eyes and drew a deep breath. The diamond pendant Vincent had given her on their 25th anniversary hung at her throat, catching the light as she stepped into the hallway where Julian waited. "Are you ready?" he asked quietly, his kind eyes searching her face. Eleanor nodded, though readiness felt like a foreign concept. How could anyone be ready for the final chapter of a 30-year love story? The conference room fell silent as she entered. Gregory sat at the head of the table, a presumptuous choice that Eleanor noted but did not challenge, with Beatrice and Thomas flanking him like sentries. Several board members occupied the remaining chairs, along with Vincent's older sister, Francine, who had flown in from Arizona. Unlike the others, Francine offered Eleanor a genuine embrace. "He adored you until his last breath," she whispered. "Never doubt that." Julian cleared his throat and placed his briefcase on the table. "Thank you all for coming. Before we begin, I must note that this proceeding is being recorded, as requested by Mr. Hargrove himself." He gestured to a small device in the center of the table. He was most insistent on this point. Gregory shifted impatiently. "Let's proceed, Julian. We all have businesses to run." Julian removed several documents from his briefcase, his movements deliberately unhurried. "Very well. This is the last will and testament of Vincent Charles Hargrove, revised and signed 6 weeks before his passing, with Dr. Melissa Thornton and myself serving as witnesses to his sound mind and voluntary action." Eleanor's hands trembled slightly in her lap. 6 weeks ago, just after they had discovered Gregory's unauthorized estate plan, Julian began reading the formal introduction, the legal language washing over Eleanor like waves against a shore. She found herself instead watching the faces around the table, the barely disguised anticipation, the practiced expressions of mourning that didn't quite reach calculating eyes. "And to my beloved wife, Eleanor Jane Hargrove," Julian continued, his voice cutting through Eleanor's thoughts, "who has been my partner in every sense of the word for 30 years. I leave the following." Gregory leaned forward almost imperceptibly. Beatrice's manicured fingernails tapped once against the polished table. "Our primary residence and all its contents, the sum of $5 million to be paid immediately from my personal accounts, and a lifetime annual income of $250,000. A beat of silence. Then Gregory's lips curved into the faintest smile. Eleanor felt her heart contract painfully in her chest. This modest provision, while generous by normal standards, represented a tiny fraction of Vincent's estate. Where was the controlling interest Vincent had promised her? The protection he had vowed? Julian continued reading, his tone neutral as he detailed bequests to various relatives, substantial sums to Francine, smaller amounts to cousins and nieces. Then came the business holdings. Regarding Hargrove Enterprises and all subsidiary companies, I appoint Gregory Hargrove as Chief Executive Officer with immediate effect, with Thomas Hargrove as Chief Operating Officer and Beatrice Hargrove as Chief Marketing Officer. Eleanor couldn't breathe. Vincent's letter had warned her, but nothing could have prepared her for this apparent betrayal. Around the table, subtle expressions of triumph bloomed. Gregory's posture relaxed into the chair, his right to it now seemingly confirmed by Vincent himself. "Furthermore," Julian continued, "voting shares shall be distributed as follows. 30% to the previously established Vincent and Eleanor Hargrove Foundation, 15% to Francine Hargrove, and the remaining 55% to be placed in the Hargrove Family Trust, to be managed by Gregory, Thomas, and Beatrice Hargrove as equal trustees." Eleanor closed her eyes briefly. Vincent had left her the house and financial security, but had given control of their life's work, the empire they had built together, to the very people who had tried to undermine her. She felt Francine's hand close over hers beneath the table, a gesture of silent support. "This concludes the formal bequests," Julian announced, shuffling his papers. However, Mr. Hargrove included a personal letter to be read aloud at this gathering. Gregory made a dismissive gesture. "We've covered the essential matters. Perhaps Mrs. Hargrove would prefer to read personal correspondence privately." "Mr. Hargrove's instructions were explicit," Julian replied firmly. "The letter is to be read aloud and included in the official record." Without waiting for further objection, he withdrew a sealed envelope from his briefcase. "To those gathered today," Julian read, "I speak now from beyond the veil that separates us, with clarity that perhaps only death can provide. First, to my wife Eleanor, forgive this necessary deception. By appearing to leave you only our home and financial security, I have created the illusion my relatives have long desired, that you were merely an accessory to my success, rather than its foundation. A confused murmur rippled around the table. Eleanor's eyes widened as Julian continued. Gregory, Thomas, Beatrice, you sit there now believing yourselves victorious. I imagine the subtle smiles, the exchanged glances of satisfaction. How predictable you've become in your greed. Gregory's face darkened. This is inappropriate and unnecessary. I will continue as instructed, Julian said firmly, his finger marking his place in the letter. For 30 years I have watched you dismiss my wife's contributions, belittle her background, and underestimate her intelligence. Even as I lay dying, you schemed to minimize her role in my legacy. But what you failed to understand is that Eleanor has always been my legacy. The room had gone completely still. Eleanor felt something shifting inside her, the cold weight of betrayal giving way to a dawning realization. Therefore, Julian read, his voice gaining strength, I direct your attention to the final document in my estate plan, dated April 15th and executed in the presence of Judge Margaret Wilson. This document, which supersedes all previous arrangements regarding Hargrove Enterprises, transfers complete ownership of the Hargrove Family Trust, the 55% you believed you would control, directly and irrevocably to Eleanor Jane Hargrove. The silence shattered. Gregory half rose from his chair, his face contorted. That's impossible. There's been some mistake. Julian calmly removed a final document from his briefcase and placed it on the table. No mistake, Mr. Hargrove. This transfer was Vincent's final act as majority shareholder. Judge Wilson came to his bedside specifically to witness his signature and affirm his mental competence. Eleanor stared at the document, her vision blurring with tears. With the foundation's 30% and now the trust's 55%, she controlled 85% of Hargrove Enterprises. He can't do this, Thomas sputtered. We'll contest it immediately. You are welcome to try, Julian replied. Though I should mention that the recording device on the table has been active throughout our entire meeting, capturing your reactions to what you believed was the distribution of assets. Vincent thought your true characters might reveal themselves today. Beatrice's face had drained of color. This is a setup. Eleanor manipulated him when he was weak. Francine spoke for the first time, her voice sharp with indignation. My brother was never stronger than in his final days when he could see all of you clearly for what you are. Julian returned to Vincent's letter for the final paragraphs. To my wife. Eleanor, you entered our marriage with nothing but your generous heart and unwavering support. You leave this room today with everything, not because I've given it to you, but because you earned it through decades of partnership. The company is yours to lead, transform, or sell as you see fit. Eleanor pressed her fingers to her lips, feeling Vincent's presence in every word. And to my family, Julian concluded, I offer one final lesson. True wealth isn't measured in assets or power. It's found in the love we give freely, expecting nothing in return. Eleanor understood this from the beginning. Perhaps now, with everything gone, you might finally learn what she has always known. As Julian folded the letter, the room erupted in chaos. Gregory was shouting about lawsuits and injunctions. Beatrice was frantically texting someone, and Thomas was demanding to see Judge Wilson's certification. But through it all, Eleanor sat perfectly still, Vincent's pendant warm against her skin, his final message to her echoing in her mind. Sometimes, destruction precedes the most beautiful growth. Blossoms of legacy. The cherry trees lining the entrance to Hargrove Enterprises headquarters were in full bloom, their pale pink petals occasionally catching in the spring breeze and drifting like snow across the renovated courtyard. Eleanor paused on the stone pathway, taking a moment to appreciate the beauty before continuing toward the building that, 1 year after Vincent's passing, still made her heart ache with bittersweet memories. The security guard nodded respectfully as she approached. Good morning, Mrs. Hargrove. Good morning, Daniel. How's your daughter doing with those college applications? His face brightened. She got accepted to Cornell yesterday. That scholarship program you started made all the difference. That's wonderful news, Eleanor replied, genuinely pleased. Make sure she applies for the Hargrove Foundation's mentorship program, too. Inside, the lobby had been transformed. Where once there had hung imposing portraits of Vincent alongside famous clients and business associates, there now existed a gallery of craftspeople, the master carpenters, apprentices and artisans who formed the true heart of what Vincent had built. Their photographs were accompanied by samples of their work and stories of their journeys. Olivia Reyes, Eleanor's executive assistant, met her at the elevator. The quarterly board meeting is set for 11, and Julian called to confirm lunch afterward. Also, the design team has finalized the plans for the craftsmanship school in Detroit and needs your approval before breaking ground. Eleanor nodded, scanning the notes on the tablet Olivia handed her. And the settlement with Gregory? Final papers were delivered this morning, Olivia confirmed. Once signed, he relinquishes all claims against the estate and agrees to the 10-year non-compete clause. The legal battles had been exhausting and expensive. Gregory, Thomas, and Beatrice had launched a multi-pronged attack on Vincent's final arrangements, claiming everything from undue influence to diminished capacity. But Julian had been methodical in his preparation. Judge Wilson's detailed assessment of Vincent's mental clarity, the video recording of his signing the transfer documents, and the damning evidence of Gregory's earlier attempt to manipulate the estate had ultimately led to their defeat. Still, Eleanor had offered them a settlement, not out of obligation, but as a final gesture of the generosity Vincent had always shown his family, even when they didn't deserve it. Vincent would say, "I'm being too soft," she had told Julian when they discussed terms. Julian had smiled knowingly. Vincent would pretend to say that, but he'd be proud of you for finding a solution that honors his memory rather than perpetuates the conflict. In her office, once Vincent's, now subtly transformed with touches of her own aesthetic, Eleanor reviewed the school plans with satisfaction. The Vincent Hargrove School of Craftsmanship would provide tuition-free education to promising students from underprivileged backgrounds, teaching traditional woodworking alongside modern design and business skills. It was the first of 5 such schools planned across the country, funded by the foundation that now controlled 30% of Hargrove Enterprises. The remaining shares, the 55% Vincent had surprisingly left to, Eleanor, had been restructured in ways that honored his vision while reflecting Eleanor's own priorities. 20% remained under her direct control, ensuring her voice would always guide the company's future. Another 20% had been distributed among the master craftspeople who had been with the company for over a decade, people whose talent Vincent had recognized and nurtured from the beginning. The remaining 15% had been placed in an employee ownership program, giving everyone from workshop apprentices to administrative staff a stake in the company's success. Radical, the business press had called it. Visionary, countered the craft and design publications. Eleanor viewed it simply as the natural evolution of what Vincent had started, a company that valued people above profits and craftsmanship above commerce. At precisely 10 o'clock, Eleanor's private line rang, the call she had been both anticipating and dreading. "Mrs. Hargrove, this is Dr. Westbrook. I'm happy to inform you that the Vincent Hargrove Memorial Wing at the Cancer Center is ready for tomorrow's dedication ceremony." "Thank you, Doctor," Eleanor replied, her voice steady despite the emotion rising in her throat. "I'll be there at noon as planned." After hanging up, she moved to the window, gazing out at the city skyline. The Cancer Center's new research wing represented the largest single donation from the foundation, $50 million dedicated to advancing treatment for the disease that had taken Vincent far too soon. It wouldn't bring him back, but it might spare other couples their fate. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. Francine entered, carrying a small potted plant with delicate white flowers. "From my garden to yours," she said, placing it on Eleanor's desk. Vincent always loved Lily of the Valley. Eleanor smiled at her sister-in-law, who had become a trusted friend and advisor over the past year. Unlike the others, Francine had accepted Vincent's decisions with grace, eventually joining the foundation's board where her practical wisdom proved invaluable. "The board meeting's going to be interesting," Francine commented, settling into a chair. "I hear the European expansion proposal has some members nervous." Eleanor nodded. "Change always makes people nervous, but Vincent didn't build this company by avoiding risk." "No," Francine agreed. "He built it by trusting his instincts and yours." The morning passed quickly in meetings and calls, and by the time Eleanor left for her lunch with Julian, she had approved the school plans, resolved a production issue at the Chicago workshop, and finalized her speech for tomorrow's dedication ceremony. Julian was waiting at their usual table at Riverside Grill, a bottle of Vincent's favorite wine already open and breathing, to surviving a year of legal battles, he proposed as they clinked glasses, and to never having to sit across a conference table from Gregory again, Eleanor added with a wry smile. They fell into comfortable conversation, reviewing the remaining legal matters and discussing the Foundation's upcoming initiatives. As their meal concluded, Julian handed Eleanor a small package. "Vincent left this with me," he explained, "with instructions to give it to you 1 year after his passing, not before." Eleanor unwrapped the package with trembling fingers to find a small wooden box, exquisitely crafted with her initials inlaid in mother of pearl. Inside lay a simple silver key and a handwritten note. "For the secret garden," the note read in Vincent's handwriting. "Because some dreams should wait until the heart is ready for new growth." Eleanor looked up, confused. "What secret garden?" Julian smiled mysteriously. "Vincent renovated the old greenhouse on the east property last spring when you were visiting your sister. He swore me to secrecy, said it was to be his final project, something only you would fully appreciate when the time was right." That afternoon, Eleanor left the office early, the silver key burning with possibility in her pocket. The drive to the estate, she still couldn't bring herself to call it home without Vincent, seemed interminable, her mind racing with questions. The old greenhouse had been abandoned years ago after a particularly harsh winter had shattered its glass panels. Vincent had talked about restoring it someday, but the expansion of the business had always taken precedence. Or so she had thought. As she followed the overgrown path around the east side of the property, Eleanor caught her breath. Where the dilapidated structure had once stood was now an elegant glass and wrought iron conservatory, its windows gleaming in the afternoon sun. Lush greenery was visible through the panes, hinting at treasures within. With unsteady hands, she inserted the key into the ornate lock. The door swung open on silent hinges, releasing a rush of warm, fragrant air. Eleanor stepped inside and gasped. The interior was a paradise of flowering plants, many of which she recognized as rare varieties she had once mentioned wanting to cultivate. Orchids in impossible colors, night-blooming jasmine, exotic ferns, and dozens of rose species lined the pathways and climbed the trellises. In the center stood a small fountain with a wooden bench beside it. Vincent's last handcrafted piece, she realized, running her fingers over the smooth curves of the armrest. On the bench lay a final envelope with her name. Inside was a single page. "My dearest Eleanor," Vincent had written, "if you're reading this, a year has passed without me by your side. I hope it has been a year of healing as much as grieving, of growth alongside loss. This greenhouse is my final gift to you, not the structure itself but what it represents. The promise that even after the harshest winter, life returns. The seeds I planted here will bloom season after season, just as the legacy we built together will continue to flourish under your care. When we met, you were reaching for a book about a love that overcame pride and prejudice. Our story required overcoming different obstacles, but the ending, I hope, brings you the same satisfaction. You entered our marriage with nothing but your heart, and left it with everything I valued. Not just material wealth, but the wisdom to use it well. Plant new dreams here, Eleanor. Your garden doesn't end with my absence. It merely enters a new season. All my love for all time, Vincent." Eleanor sank onto the bench, tears flowing freely now. Around her, life bloomed in riotous color and scent. Vincent's final expression of a love that had spanned decades and would continue beyond his lifetime. The next day, as she stood at the podium to dedicate the Cancer Center's new wing, Eleanor felt a strange sense of completion. The audience before her included hospital staff, Foundation board members, company employees, and even some of Vincent's relatives, Francine front and center, Gregory and the others noticeably absent. "My husband believed that true wealth isn't measured by what we accumulate," she began, her voice strong and clear, "but by what we build that continues beyond us." Vincent Hargrove built beautiful furniture. Yes, but more importantly, he built relationships, opportunities, and legacies that will outlast all of us. As she spoke, Eleanor felt Vincent's presence, not in the grief that had consumed her for months, but in the purpose that now drove her forward. He had given her everything, not just in his final act of legal maneuvering, but throughout their 30 years together, his trust, his vision, and most importantly, his unwavering belief in her ability to continue what they had started. Today, we dedicate this research wing not just to fighting the disease that took him from us too soon, she continued, but to honoring how he lived with generosity, foresight, and profound love. That evening, Eleanor returned to the greenhouse, her secret garden, with a small potted seedling. She had discovered it that morning, a volunteer plant growing beside Vincent's grave beneath the oak tree. A maple sapling, its delicate leaves reaching for the sun with the same persistence that had characterized Vincent's approach to life. She found the perfect spot near the center fountain and carefully transplanted the seedling, patting the rich soil around its tender roots. "There," she whispered as if Vincent could hear her. "Something new is growing, just like you planned all along." Outside the glass walls, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the estate gardens they had designed together. But inside this sanctuary, this place of new beginnings, Eleanor Hargrove watched the fading light illuminate possibilities she was only beginning to imagine. The garden of their shared life had entered a new season, and she found herself at last ready to bloom again.